So I know there's a million different options out there for patch cables when you're trying to wire up a new pedal board or just improve the wires you have. An age-old debate of soldered versus solderless, which one's better. Forever I thought it was soldered. That was just bad luck of me trying, George L's, these craptastic DYNir do-it-yourself solderless kits. The one with the little screw on the side here. Yeah, don't use those. They might be good for stationary pedal boards that don't go anywhere, but as soon as you start taking it to practices and gigs, for me at least, I was having issues with them shorting out all over the place and was constantly tearing down my board and rebuilding it. So hopefully I can help you from not having the same issue. For me, after trying many, by far the best solderless system on the market are these Evidence Audio screw-in solderless kits with the monorail. I bought these about 7 years ago, and the best thing about them is you can actually, you don't need a soldering gun, obviously, but you can rebuild them if you need to. Let's say you have the wrong length on it, you simply screw it off like this, cut it down to whatever size you want, and then just reinsert the tip and thread it again. Now, one common thing I see in all the videos of people making these, showing how to make these, is they seem to over-tighten this. The first time I did that, I over-tightened this and had the little copper tip break off in the tip, which made it to where I couldn't even use that tip. So you really only need about a half a turn just to make sure it's snug. And then once you put the cap on, you're turning it even more to get it further into that threading. And hopefully this way you won't have any issues at all with them failing. I think that's the only way people get these to break on them. Now, obviously the solderless cables are a lot easier to make. You don't need any soldering irons or anything like that. It takes a lot less time to do. Now, some people do just prefer soldered cables, especially if you can do it yourself. Now, what I did, I originally had this entire board done with only Evidence Audio solderless cables. Now, with all the Evidence Audio patch cables, I also had a snake containing 4 Evidence Audio monorail cables. Now, I didn't switch because of any issues I was having. Like many guitar players, I suffer from the "there's nothing wrong with it, but let's see if we can make it better" syndrome, if there is such a thing. So my original snake only had the 4 audio cables, which was great when I was using my EVH amp for the send and return of the effects loop, the amp, and then also the foot switch, which is an audio cable on that. Now, what I didn't have in there was a MIDI cable for my newer amp, the MLC amp. Nor did I have a power cable running through the whole thing. So I took a look at the BTPA website and saw they had this composite cable here. And what it is, there's several different options you can get for how many cables are in it. But it's basically just a thick PVC jacket here. And you've got all your audio cables. I think I deleted the stereo cable just because I don't use the stereo cable. I've also got a MIDI cable and a power cable, and then one more which you can't see because it's hiding under there. Another audio cable just for when I use the EVH amp and need that for that foot switch. Now, once I switched the snake to BTPA, I figured out I would try some of their patch cables too. So the BTPA patch cables were about $17 a piece ish, but that's to get them to make it. Since I don't have a soldering iron, it's something I need to get into. To save some money, obviously, but they're about, $16, $17 a piece for the lengths that I needed. Obviously, you'll save money if you just buy the cable in bulk and buy all the SP400 tips and can solder them yourself. More power to you. Now, the Evidence Audio tips are about $8 a tip. So for a whole cable, you're paying about $16. They come in different size kits depending on how many you need. There's always extra wire that comes with it, so you shouldn't have to worry about not getting enough wire with the tips that you buy. Now, like I said before, there was nothing wrong with the Evidence Audio. I never had a single issue. This board has had them on there for about 7 years and has seen plenty of gigs, plenty of rehearsals per week. I play in several different bands, so the board is constantly getting abused, constantly getting packed up and set back up. It's had beer spills on it. It's been thrown off stage when trying to rig in and out. If you are a gigging musician, I can't recommend making your own snake or having the composite cable like this just to save time. Prior to that, it was 4 different cables plus a power cable plus a MIDI cable, and it's really easy to forget one of them at a gig and then realize you have to buy another one, or just the time saving. You're just setting up one wire and then plugging them all in here versus setting each one up individually. Now you may notice when I switched everything over to BTPA, I still have a couple loops over here that are using the evidence audio. The reason for that is since the tips are so much smaller on the evidence audio, they actually fit better into the staggered style input jacks on the Loop Master pedal there. Whereas on this side over here, they're not that staggered offset pattern, so I could fit the SP400 plugs. So that's definitely a win to the evidence audio. The other thing I love about the evidence audio is how stiff and how thick the copper seems to be in these, whereas if you're trying to route it on your board, any bends you put in the cable just kind of stay there. So it makes for, really nice routing, and anybody that's got OCD will be very happy with the results. Now again, these were on my board for 7 years without a single failure. Now one thing that helps with that is making sure everything's tied down, not enough to where you're actually putting any stress on the jack or anything like that, but just to where it's not going to go anywhere, top and bottom, so that as you load in and out, it's not shaking around and loosening up those connectors. The only issue with the evidence audio ones is every once in a while where it screws in here, it gets a little loose. So, every couple months you just kind of have to go through them all, make sure none of them have come loose and tighten them down if you can. When I build them, I try to use pliers and tighten it down as much as I can, but it just still seems no matter what I do, they tend to come loose a little bit. So just stay on top of that and you shouldn't have any issues. I recorded a bunch of clips and only a few of them I could really tell a difference, so I kind of whittled it down to just the ones with a noticeable difference to my ear. These are around the same price, but they're also both kind of the best in their category. The evidence audio cables I notice have a little bit warmer and darker of a sound. When I switched to the soldered cables and the BTPA audio cables going to and from the amp, I noticed just a little bit more sustain, and that the highs are a little more defined. Like the everything just sounds a little bit brighter with those. I know I see a lot of people on online forums trying to find the absolute best tone and buy every cable out there. And for me, spending good money on cables isn't about a tone. It isn't about, any kind of result in changing your sound. For me, high quality cables are just for reliability, especially if you're a gigging musician. I want everything to work. I don't want to have buzzes and hums when I'm up on stage that, just started there. I just want everything to work, everything to be packed up and rigged in and out constantly without having failures and having issues. So for me, the money is worth it to just invest in not having problems. The board setup isn't quite as complicated as it looks. There really isn't as much going on there as it appears to be. So basically, I've got the guitar in to go through this interface panel from BTPA. When I was using the evidence audio kit, I was just using a passive pass-through with more solderless cables, but I actually had BTA send me an interface with all soldered cables. So it basically goes into the pedal board, into the tuner, and then into that first loop over here. And then from that first loop, it goes right back out to the front of the amp. The loops consist of a wah and a phaser in loop 1, a compressor in loop 2, and then an overdrive in loop 3, and then it goes back to the amp. The effects loop comes in and goes into the ISP decimator noise gate, and then into the second loop, which is just a delay into the H9 and then back to the amp. Now, one thing I was worried about was having this power cable run next to the audio cables, as if you read online, that's, according to some people, a big no-no. But honestly, I haven't noticed any increase in any kind of noise or anything like that. BTPA assured me that everything is shielded properly and a little bit overdone, and that they've never had a return due to noise of the power cable running through the composite cable too. It's something I didn't do in the evidence audio snake. The differences between the two snakes themselves, with the evidence audio snake, it's definitely a lot easier. I mean, it's less wires, there's no power cable, there's no MIDI cable. They are all braided wires, but with the pedal python on the outside, it just rolls up a lot easier, makes a much smaller profile to fit into a gig bag. Whereas the composite cable here, it's very heavy duty, which is a good thing for if you're on stage. Somebody can roll a 4x12 cab over it, you're not going to have an issue. It's a little stiffer and harder to roll up, and it definitely has a larger profile, and I have trouble fitting it into some gig bags. But it definitely saves a lot of hassle having the power cable and everything in this one cable. It just takes me just a few minutes to set up, and that's definitely a plus. Basically, where I'm at now, in my opinion, this board is done. It's super quiet. I've got the Strymon power supply underneath, custom length power cables, and again, the evidence audio cables 7 years, not a single failure, not a single issue, not a single short. The BTPA cables I've only had for a little under a year now, but same thing, I haven't had a single issue with those. Now for the sound clips, the Evidence Audio sound clips will have all Evidence Audio cables on the board, and I'll also be using the Evidence Audio monorail to and from the amp. For the BTPA, everything is switched over except for the 2 loops I mentioned, but I will not be using those in any of the sound clips. I'll only be using, anything on the gain channel will have that loop to the overdrive, but the cables have been switched out there. So let me know if you hear anything else that I missed. Again, all I noticed is that the BTPA cables seem slightly brighter, but in a band mix or at a show, nobody's going to notice the difference between the two. So really, if you know how to solder, save the money, buy the tips, and do it yourself. If you don't know how to solder or just don't have the time to solder, these Evidence Audio cables are super easy to make, and I can't recommend them enough, especially if your board's constantly changing and you need to change the length on the cables. They're great for that. And again, not a single issue in 7 years.